honorable members. The question that was, well, the question for me to answer at the time, the question was raised whether Standing Order 9 should be allowed to be suspended at this time. First, let me say that I'm hoping that all members took the opportunity during the break, besides the time that I asked for me to give a ruling, that all the members took the time to have something to mention, because I suspect that I won't take a break until we decide to come to the end of the sitting. Section of Standing Order 85 allows for a motion to be made at any sitting of the House by any member to suspend any of these standing orders. Section Standing Order 9 states, unless the House otherwise direct, the business of each sitting day shall be transacted in the following order. And Order 9 lists from 1 to 15 the order of precedence for any sitting. So it means that even if we do not publish a standing order beforehand, the House will know what the order of precedence for the day is. So it means that we would start with prayers, oath of allegiance if there is a need to, announcement by speakers, statements by ministers, and we continue down the list. So no government can decide on its own, or any minister can decide on its own to change the order of precedence. The order of precedence. That cannot be changed. In other words, that the House is the only House is the only one with the power to change the order. That's the order of precedence. We know what the order of precedence. The question now is, the order paper must be made available to members. And my interpretation of it, by following all jurisdictions and reading up on all jurisdictions, the order paper, when so decided, and the House has accepted the order paper, not the order of precedence, the order paper, then the order paper for the day must be the order paper for the day. I hope the House understands the difference between the order for the day and the order of precedence. There's a big difference. Standing Order 9 states, unless the House otherwise direct. In other words, you could read it to mean the business of each day of the House will be as follows, until such time the House decides to change it. And that can be done by the House authorizing a suspension and changing it. And on that basis, I am now agreeing and granting leave to the Prime Minister to move his motion.
Mr. Speaker, I can sit on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Yeah.
Huh? On a point of order.
Let me hit a point of order.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm rising on a point of order because I need to get from you whether you are making a ruling which you would not entertain any responses from members of this House. Because I would want to believe, Mr. Speaker, that you've delivered a ruling, but you have not indicated to us in any ways any authority that guides such a reasoning, because I'm not questioning you. I'm asking, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
I'm on a point of order. I'm on a point of order.
The honorable member is making a point of order. And I would like to
Mr. Speaker, I would want to know, Mr. Speaker, we are in a house of an honorable
Honorable
house.
members, I would like to hear the point of order.
We are in an honorable house, Mr. Speaker. We're in a house where the subject for which we are discussing the procedural matter is a fundamental bill that affects the rights and freedoms of St. Lucians.
Yes.
You are making a ruling, and you have not. You are making a ruling, Mr. Speaker, and you have not provided us with any authority that guides you in making such a ruling. And I think, Mr. Speaker, like was said earlier, you are a member.
Honorable members, allow me to hear the member.
You're a magistrate, and you know the importance of citing authorities and precedents and everything else, Mr. Speaker. Erskine May's page 382, 24th edition, is very clear in terms of, in our view, how one should be guided on such an occasion. If you are saying to us you have an authority which is different to that, or your interpretation of Erskine May's is such that it is a different interpretation, I would certainly like for you and for the record to indicate to us what that interpretation is. But you deliver a ruling which is supposed to be a definitive and final ruling without any reference to any authority or any source. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker.
I'm on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I'm on a point of order.
Honorable members, honorable members.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, let me answer the honorable member without even allowing him to complete his statement. Let me allow you.
I'm on my feet.
I stood on a point of order.
Yes, let me answer the honorable member. Honorable members, I can walk out of here.
So, but what is going on here?
Honorable member, allow me to hear the honorable
What kind
member.
of disrespect is that? An honorable member.
You disrespecting the House like
Honorable members, allow me to hear, and I will answer the member. Turn off your light, member for Grocery.
I stood on a point of order.
Yes.
My point of order.
Honorable member,
So I'm asking you, Mr. Speaker.
I've heard your submission, and let me answer you right away, and that would be it. The same Erskine May referred to, if you turn to page 382, it says the order of the day. That is why I went through the pain of making it clear what the order of the day is and the order of precedent of the day. There's a difference. The order of the day is what we call here our order paper. It states what ought to be dealt with for the day. The sequence is something different. That is the difference. Honorable Prime Minister, you may so move, setting out your reasons and whatever.
I beg to leave the House to suspend the Standing Order 9, order of business to allow the House to deal with the COVID-19 bill at this stage of the sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 9 be suspended to allow the Prime Minister to deal with the COVID-19 bill at this time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, you may have to put me out on a point of order, Mr. Speaker. After we debate the bill, what happens next? All the other items on the order, do you go back to the normal order paper, or is the House suspended? I mean, this is not, Mr. Speaker, this is not a street corner, this is Parliament.
Honorable Member, we just given leave to the Prime Minister to deal with the COVID-19 bill at this time. Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled COVID-19 Prevention and Control.
COVID-19 Prevention and Control.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable Members, the question is that Standing Order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion, say no. No. Madam Clerk, division, please.
Honorable Dr. Kenny Anthony, how do you vote?
No. Deputy, just honorable members, please. You may proceed.
Honorable Dr. Kenny Anthony, how do you vote?
No.
Honorable Alva Baptiste, how do you vote? Honorable Alan Shasley, how do you vote? Aye. Honorable Sean Edward, how do you vote? No. Honorable Edmund Estefan, how do you vote? Aye. Honorable Dominic Fady, how do you vote? Yes. Honorable Bradley Felix, how do you vote? Aye. Honorable Sarah Floyd Bowbray, how do you vote? Aye. Honorable Dr. Ernest Hilaire, how do you vote? Honorable Moses Jabatis, how do you vote? No. Honorable Ezekiel Joseph, how do you vote? Honorable Guy Joseph, how do you vote? Yes. Honorable Stevenson King, how do you vote? Honorable Leonard Montoot, how do you vote? Honorable Philip J. Pierre, how do you vote? Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert, how do you vote? Honorable Harold Stanislas, how do you vote?
Honorable members, the result of the division, aye 11, no 6, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled COVID-19 Prevention and Control. On January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization, Director General under the International Health Regulations, IHR 2005, declared the outbreak of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, in the People's Republic of China a public health emergency of international concern. This status galvanizes all states globally to act with collective purpose to contain this outbreak, which poses a potential threat to every nation and every global citizen. Subsequent to this declaration, over 214 countries and territories have reported confirmed cases of COVID-19. As was predicted by the WHO, further international spread of COVID-19 continues worldwide. As of September 20th, 2020, the WHO reported globally over 30.6 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, with 954,417 deaths. This is well documented in the latest WHO COVID-19 report, which notes that during the period of 14th to the 20th of September 2020, there were almost 20 million new cases of COVID-19, which represents the highest number of reported cases in a single week since the very beginning of the epidemic. As we monitor the global and regional situation, reports we note the development of the increased weekly case incidence across all WHO regions in the last 7 days, with the exception of the African region. The WHO notes that the European region showed the greatest increase in deaths in the past week. We also note increased cases within our regional countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Bahamas, Martinique, and Guadeloupe. It is therefore imperative that as a small island nation we remain vigilant and maintain the gains achieved thus far. On March 13, 2020, St. Lucia confirmed the first COVID-19 case imported from the United Kingdom. As the number of cases increased from March 2020, it became necessary to implement more stringent measures to protect the health and the safety of our citizens. Some of these measures, although difficult and even onerous, have proven beneficial in the prevention and the control of COVID-19. The state of emergency, which commenced in March 23, 2020, facilitated the effective implementation of the following measures: a 24-hour curfew over the period April 1st to April 7th, 2020. Travel restrictions and zoning of the country to reduce movement as a strategy to minimize potential transmission of the virus. Suspension of liquor license as a means of minimizing social gatherings, which provide hubs for potential exposure to and transmission of the virus. School closure. Establishing and enforcing infection prevention and control protocols for public and private sector organizations. Prohibition of assembly and restrictions within specific areas. Physical distancing measures and use of masks in public settings. In St. Lucia, to date, we've recorded a total of 27 confirmed with 0 deaths. Although the incidence of COVID-19 in St. Lucia remains one of the lowest in the region, the threat of introduction of an outbreak, unfortunately, remains high. Following the declaration of this pandemic, St. Lucia effectively began preparation to reduce morbidity and mortality to this public health threat, with close collaboration and support from public health agencies, including the Pan American Health Organization, Caribbean Public Health Agency, and Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. This included a comprehensive plan of action, which included the following aspects: healthcare facility preparation with the establishment of 5 respiratory clinics and 1 national respiratory hospital. Training and preparation of healthcare workers, including both clinical and public health specialists. Augmentation of the national medical human resource capacities through solidarity support from the Cuban Medical Brigade. Establishment of state quarantine facilities with approximately 2,257 individuals placed in government quarantine and 1,594 home quarantined. Development of an in-country testing capacity for PCR testing for COVID-19 with over 8,120 tests conducted to date. Procurement of personal protective equipment, supplies and medication, development of port health facilities and strengthened surveillance, national public education and communication campaign, utilization of the 311 hotline as an information dissemination of COVID-19, stakeholder consultation and discussions with both locally, regionally, and internationally. As predicted by the Director General of the WHO, Mr. Tedros, we anticipate the threat of COVID-19 to be around for the next 2 years. Let me repeat that again. As predicted by the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, we anticipate the threat of COVID-19 to be around for the next 2 years. As COVID-19 cases and deaths have started to spike again globally, we are still in a very critical position, and leaders need to put targeted, sustained measures to protect the health of citizens. All countries, including St. Lucia, need to take and continue to take urgent and necessary action for citizens to live safely with COVID-19. The government, through the recommendations from the established command center, has facilitated the safe phase reopening of the country and the economy. This has resulted in almost all sectors reopening with effective protocols as their guide. The government of St. Lucia, through the Ministry of Health and Wellness, continues to monitor the global and regional situation and strengthen protocols to ensure evidence-based measures are used to guide recommendations and protocols as we continue to open up the economy safely. The Environmental Health Department, in their review of various sectors and our internal analysis, have made many observations that need to be continually addressed and enforced. Our main risk to community outbreak at this point include the following. Some of our tourism markets remain at high risk given their rates of infection. The illegal entry of persons from countries of high risk and are interacting socially in our communities. The non-adherence of some citizens to home quarantining. The non-adherence of some visitors to hotel protocols. The reduced use and poor use of face masks in public places. The increased mass crowd events noted across the island. The breaches to established protocols within some business places. The crowding of public buses without the use of face masks. The national state of emergency expires on September 30th, 2020. However, it is necessary to introduce a bill specifically to deal with and manage the effect of and an impact of COVID-19, which continues to be a threat to our island. The introduction of a piece of legislation to manage or curb the spread of these diseases is not novel, and Parliament has in the past introduced legislation to do so by virtue of the Public Health Act, which made provisions for the management of ailments such as cholera, yellow fever, and smallpox. The Quarantine Act, which governs the management and the quarantine of persons with infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and smallpox. It would not, I repeat, it would not have been prudent to amend these pieces of legislation to make reference to COVID-19, as COVID-19 has forced us to change our way of life as we know it. Unlike anything envisioned within the parameters of the Public Health Act or the Quarantine Act. St. Lucia in the past has also passed legislation for the management of persons with leprosy by way of the Lepers Act Cap 11.13. This bill, like others passed before it, to deal with specific threats caused by infectious diseases, is necessary to effectively manage and keep St. Lucians and all visitors to our shores COVID-free. Also, having the legislation for a specific period of time, again, is nothing new. St. Lucia, in the year, enacted legislation to deal with Cricket World Cup, which, similar to this bill, contained a sunset clause deemed to expire at a certain time. For emphasis, this is not a state of emergency bill. This bill is permissible under the Constitution as it exists to maintain and protect the interests of public safety, public order, and public health, and for related matters. This bill, notwithstanding the existence of any other piece of legislation, is for the sole purpose of controlling the spread of COVID-19 outside of a state of emergency. Therefore, it does not conflict with any other piece of legislation. For example, any permits granted under the Public Order Act shall not be affected unless, of course, any such permit granted must be revoked due to the threat of the spread of COVID-19. This revocation being done by the regulatory authority on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer. One simply has to look at what is transpiring in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica and the Bahamas, and the United States, which has more resources than we do, to understand the importance of having a dedicated piece of legislation to deal with COVID-19 pandemic. This is about protecting the citizens of our country, protecting the fabric of our society, and maintaining the rule of law. The Constitution of St. Lucia, which is the supreme law of our land. Whilst the Constitution of St. Lucia provides us with certain guarantees and protections, these protections are not absolute, and the state has, by virtue of our very Constitution, the power where reasonable and justified, to infringe upon the rights of some in the interest of the general public and the safety of St. Lucians as a collective. The bill also establishes the legislative framework that governs the operations of the business within the tourism sector. The implementation of this certification regime will ensure that no person, business, or entity operating in St. Lucia tourism industry will offer any service or product for reward unless a COVID-19 compliance has been issued. The certificate shall be displayed in the prominent position of the business place and is valid for the validity period of the bill. The bill makes it an offense to operate without such certification. All tourism services, including accommodation and ancillary services, must be certified to operate as a demonstration of compliance with the approved public health protocols for their respective businesses. This includes accommodation, land and marine-based transport, visitor attractions, destination management services. The Ministry of Tourism, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, has approved a number of protocols with which businesses must comply as part of this certification. Protocols are based on requirements established by the World Health Organization, international best practices with the tourism industry, and local industries. Certification is based on the presentation of COVID-19 response plans as required and must be approved by the Ministry of Health. It is also approved upon completion of the COVID-19 protocol training. Businesses shall be subject to an inspection upon receipt of the plan, after which a COVID-19 compliance certificate may be issued with or without conditions in accordance with the bill. The Ministry of Tourism shall ensure that the businesses that have received certification are listed in the Gazette. This also applies to cases where the certificate has been revoked, and in such cases a tourism business will cease to operate until corrective action is taken by the operator. In addition, the bill provides the legal basis for the command center, which was created during the state of emergency. The bill operates outside of the state of emergency, and therefore the Prime Minister is no longer recognized as the only competent authority to carry out the provisions of the bill. Alternatively, The bill is administered primarily by the Minister of Health. The bill also empowers the Chief Medical Officer, the Ministry of Tourism, and the Minister of Finance to perform functions under the bill. The COVID-19 Prevention and Control Bill provides the legal framework to deal specifically with the COVID-19 disease outside the state of emergency. Speaker, also very important for us to understand and appreciate how this bill came into being and why. When COVID was introduced to the world, we quickly recognized that the legislation that we had wasn't sufficient for us to deal with the necessary protocols, and more importantly, with the speed in which we had to act. Because sadly, COVID is something that comes upon you very quickly. There are countries who thought they had conquered COVID and now find themselves very quickly back in the midst of COVID. During that period, while we were in the state of the emergency, the command center collaborated with many persons in the private sector and many associations. In fact, two of the associations that have written to us have been frequent members to our command center and providing input on all of the SIs that have been produced. So in essence, we've had the state of the emergency, and as necessary, SIs are produced in order to give legitimacy and legal framework to the protocols we're putting in, whether it was in those days a curfew, whether it is in having to wear a face mask, whether it is in crowd sizes. And the law that allowed us to do that was the state of emergency. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, I think we all were hoping that by the time October came around, that we would have a better understanding of how long COVID was going to be with us. And I think that we were all secretly optimistic and praying, Mr. Speaker, that in fact the brilliant minds of the world by this time would have discovered a vaccine. Even in the absence of a vaccine, a cure. And we also think a rapid test, because we know that testing helps. But sadly, we have not seen any new rapid test to be approved by the WHO. We don't appear to be any closer to a vaccine, and certainly no one is offering a solution or a treatment for COVID. And therefore, the predictions by many of the experts are that we're not going to see any form of solution for the next 2 years. I think it's safe to say, in the environment that we're in today, and within the next year, a pending election, that we would not want to stay, Mr. Speaker, in a state of emergency. So I think that the Attorney General's office has come up with a great alternative. And that alternative, Mr. Speaker, is to create a specific act. And what is that act? That act is simply the accumulation of all of the SIs that we have done. So when persons say they've had no involvement or consultation, we quickly remind them that we've not done anything new. All we've done is taken the SIs in which they consulted and were part of and put them all under one act. And we gave it a life of 2 years. Why did we choose 2 years? Because 2 years is pretty much the consensus of the experts as to how long it may take. Now, the experts may be wrong, and it's going to take less. And if it does, then the Minister of Health can recommend that the act be terminated. But there also might be a possibility, Mr. Speaker, that it may be longer than 2 years, and that we may have to extend it. But the fact is, we cannot stay in a permanent state of emergency, because as members on the opposite side and many members of the civil society would know, that in essence, the state of emergency gives the government much broader powers. Doesn't even have to be for COVID issues. Although I am very proud about the members on this side, that even with that awesome authority, that we have never abused it for 1 minute and have stayed in the context of COVID-19. I think, Mr. Speaker, the other issue at hand here, how do you argue with success? While members on the other side have either pontificated or wished that we were the worst prepared, in fact, St. Lucia is the best prepared and has performed the best in the Caribbean. And I dare say, Mr. Speaker, that we are one of the best in the world. And I heard members on the opposite side earlier today, Mr. Speaker. We have not sat here on our hands. We have not allowed the size of our country to prevent us to believe that we can lead the way in the world. And we have taken proactive measures, Mr. Speaker, to share with the rest of the world St. Lucia's success. And that success on reopening our doors has been predicated on two key principles, Mr. Speaker. Two. One starts with the premise that we have no option but to coexist with COVID. This idea that we can simply hand out money we don't have to be able to provide people with income support is not possible. We believe that investing in the money into economic activity, and that should the experts be right, that by the time the 2 years or 1.5 years comes about, that we actually would have a head of steam, and that we would have actually invested in expanding in the capacity of our country, which would then redound to the benefit of every single St. Lucian. The alternative of staying locked down, Mr. Speaker, as some other countries have in the world. We cannot print money, Mr. Speaker. We can only borrow money. And when we talk about fiscal prudence, it is that fiscal prudence that has told us that we have to invest in our country and invest in our capacity of our country to grow. The second principle, Mr. Speaker, other than coexisting with COVID, is having people pre-tested before they come to our country. This idea that persons can go on a plane and you don't even know if the person next to you has COVID or not. And so we've seen examples around the world and in our region where persons have arrived who've been pre-tested along with people who are not pre-tested, only to be told when they were at their hotel or back at their home that the person you were sitting next to had COVID, and you yourself have to go into quarantine. So St. Lucia has been almost on a one-country crusade to encourage the world to adopt pre-testing as an international policy. And I am very proud of the fact that in 6 weeks of advocacy, that we've now gotten IATA to join us, the governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands, the prime ministers of the OECS, the governor of New York, Cuomo, now has said and insisted and defied CDC and said everybody coming into a New York airport must be pre-tested. I'm also satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that countries around the world have recognized St. Lucia's success and have included us in a bubble in which their citizens can travel to our country and return without being tested. And the ability to advocate on the international arena is made easier when you are successful, when in fact that you have led by example and that you are practicing what you preach. So, Mr. Speaker, it is impossible to keep a state of emergency on for this period of time. We simply have taken the best practices over the last 6 months, which are the SIs which have come out of consultations with hoteliers, with business people, with other doctors, even with the Bar Association. And that there is nothing too fair in this act. That being said, Mr. Speaker, that when we circulated a new version of the act, we did so because we made 3 very subtle changes. In Clause 11 of the bill, Subclause 3, adequate compensation is changed to full compensation as follows. 3 says, after the requisition, the government shall make prompt and full compensation in the circumstances to the owner or occupier of the building, vessel, aircraft, or article. The second one is in clause 62. Publication of false statements has been removed, and therefore the subsequent clauses have been renumbered. In clause 63, subclause 2C, physical distancing is removed and replaced by the fees to be paid at a quarantine facility. This will enable the making of regulations to specify the amounts applicable to the quarantine at a facility. Clause 62 had been included in previous SIs and had been included in the protocols. And I think it was well intended, Mr. Speaker. Because in this circumstance where people's fear is already at a heightened level, that when persons knowingly are publishing information they know to be false, which we call fake news. And it's very alarming to persons who are already very scared. But we are satisfied that there are already legislation that exists that would allow us to hold those persons who are continuing to practice fake news accountable. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I am looking forward to the support of my colleagues in quick time in order to pass this critical act. And I can say to you, Mr. Speaker, certainly in speaking to other colleagues in the region and around the world, again, St. Lucia will be a leader. Many countries are having the same difficulty in maintaining a state of emergency for something that's going to last much longer than many of us had predicted. With that, I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Bill be read a second time. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as usual, the Prime Minister could not help himself. So he starts with his plea for statesmanship and he enters into the political domain and saying things that he knows are not true. Mr. Speaker, I want to put on record of this Honorable House the statement that I made about St. Lucia being the worst prepared country for COVID. Mr. Speaker, I said I made the statement when St. Lucia had absolutely no quarantine facilities. The Prime Minister was speaking about quarantine at Rat Island. He was with a measuring tape at Rat Island measuring the buildings for quarantine. That's what he said. When I made the statement, there were no testing facilities in St. Lucia for COVID when I made the statement. When I made the statement, Mr. Speaker, we in this side of the House, we were urging the government to close the country, but because he had some Chinese friends coming over to St. Lucia for his horse racing, he allowed the country to be open. At the press conference, we made that statement and said to close the country because of COVID, but he left it open because he had his Chinese friends coming for horse racing. That is when I said the country was the worst prepared. When I said the country was the worst prepared country.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Honorable Leader of the Opposition. He's standing on the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the member is imputing improper motive. You cannot say about a member of the House, you cannot say that the Prime Minister left the country open because he had his Chinese friends coming. How does he prove that, Mr. Speaker? That is imputing improper motive, and then, as a result, he should be asked to withdraw that statement, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, Leader of the Opposition, I so agree that that statement is a very, I will not say it, but I think that that part that the Prime Minister left the country open because he had Chinese friends should be so withdrawn.
Because the Prime Minister did not leave the country open for his Chinese friends. But he kept the country open when we were urging him to close it. We held a press conference and we almost begged them, told them it was time to close the country because of COVID. The government did not do it. Since that time, Mr. Speaker, the opposition has supported the government in every aspect of its COVID response. We came in this honorable house when they had the first state of emergency, and we said to them, although we have concerns about some of the provisions of state of emergency, we are going to support it because we understand the danger of COVID. But they can't help themselves. The politics of the Speaker, they can't help themselves. Every time they came with the state of emergency, we supported it. The Prime Minister was at a party in the Answer constituency without masks. Among people in a block O, when they were raising funds for somebody in the constituency of Answer, he had no mask. He was in Answer in a rum shop with no mask. I have never been in public without a mask because I wanted to set the example, Mr. Speaker. So when the Prime Minister comes and the members and pretend that this opposition did not support COVID, and we said it was the worst country prepared. When we said it, I was justified, and when I said it, it was to ensure that St. Lucia did what it had to do for the people of St. Lucia not to get affected more by COVID. So I make no apologies for it. I make absolutely no apologies for it, Mr. Speaker, because I was right at the time, because at that time, the government had absolutely no clue, because they were hoping and they were hoping that COVID would have disappeared. But, Mr. Speaker, coming back to this bill in this honorable house, the government of Grenada, and when something is working properly, they take all the praise. When something is not, they blame everybody else. The government of Grenada had the same COVID control bill in July, 26th of July in Grenada. COVID control bill. I have a comparison between both acts, but I will not do it this evening. Government accepts responsibility for not ensuring that the public had the bill before attempting to take it to Parliament, and therefore commits to the process. And the government withdrew the bill for public consultation. All this government knew that the state of emergency would have ended in the 30th of September. They knew that. That wasn't news. That was a fact. When he came here to extend the state of emergency, it was until the 30th of September. They called 2 sittings of the House that they postponed for their own selfish reasons. They postponed it. They could have come before for these sittings and discuss it. Or they could have sent the first reading and discuss it on the 19th, the last Tuesday. For their own selfish reasons, they postponed it, Mr. Speaker, because this government believes they can do whatever they want. And that is why they believe, because they have the majority of votes in this parliament, they can do whatever they want. That parliament could have met last week. That bill could have been circulated early on and debated last week. No one will have any problems. They did not. They come this morning, and at 5 to 5, they table another bill at 5 to 5 and tell us that we must trust them. That's a government that has used state power for 4 years to go after one member of parliament. That's the same government. That's the same government, Mr. Speaker, that stood in this honorable house and said we have to cry because we are not members, because we do not support because we are in opposition. That's a government, Mr. Speaker, that you cannot trust, Mr. Speaker, because that is a government that collectively and individually pinpoints people for victimization and vindictiveness. Mr. Speaker, this government, Mr. Speaker, they want us to come here and trust them. How can you trust a government that is passing a bill about COVID, functions of the command center? There is not one representative from the St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association, nor there is any representative from the opposition. And you talk about a national effort for COVID. Not one member from the Medical and Dental Association, Mr. Speaker. Not one member. You speak about consultation. The Bar Association, made up of lawyers in this country, has told you that there are provisions in this act that need to be looked into. You ignore them. The Hotel and Tourism Association, an association that you said, that you say, all the country depends on tourism, and you have a wonderful relationship with the Tourism Association, the SLHTA. They tell you, Mr. Speaker, I hope it's on the record that the Minister for Tourism has said that I paid the St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association to write a letter. I want to put on the record of this Parliament that the Minister of Tourism said that I paid the St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association money to write a letter. That is the level that we've reached in this country. And you want me to trust a government like that? You hear what he's saying? And you think I can trust a government like that? Mr. Speaker, I did not pay them. I didn't pay them. The people will pay you when the time comes. Mr. Speaker, here is a government that speaks about consultation. But two of the main bodies of the country, including the opposition, tells you to hold back. You had the opportunity. You knew it was happening. You knew the 30th of September was the time. You allowed it to come to the 29th. And you want us to railroad yourself and you want us to sit and accept it because you say so? Mr. Speaker, you knew that on the 30th of September, the state of emergency would have ended. You could have done that a long time before. You could have circulated the bill early for discussion. It was nothing new. Everybody knew that COVID would not have ended on the 30th of September. No, that was no news. Why didn't you, if you had respect for the people of St. Lucia, and if you wanted to consult with the people of St. Lucia, you would have had this bill circulated because you knew it was ending on the 30th of September, but you did not. And you want us to sit and accept it because you say so. And you look for all kind of excuses about, I said it was the worst prepared, etc. Just because you do not want to admit that you made an error, and you should have circulated that bill a long time ago for discussion with the people of the country. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill, in section 66, before I go to section 66, in section 62, the government comes and speaks all the time about 361, 361, 361. The exact wording for 661 was a publication of false statements. And if there was not certain interventions, it would have passed. Because the intention was to pass it. That is why it's in the first copy of the bill. And at 5 to 5, you come with a different one. Mr. Speaker, regulations. The minister may, on the recommendations of the chief medical officer, make regulations to give effect to this act. Without limiting the right of subsection 1, the minister can make regulations for the protocols under section 20, for the wearing of masks. So the regulations, Mr. Speaker, can change the bill. The regulations can change the bill. So they can do whatever changes they want there without coming back to this Parliament. And he calls it a bill. Matter of correction, he says it's an act. It's a bill, not an act, Mr. Speaker. On the record, the Prime Minister says it's an act, it's a bill. So, Mr. Speaker, we believe that this government wants to push things down the throats of the people of St. Lucia and using the majority that they have in Parliament. And even if there's extensive concern by people not in any way closely related to the Labour Party, the Minister of Tourism can say that we paid them. That is how the Minister of Tourism, that's what he feels of the pioneers of tourism in St. Lucia. That's what he feels about them, that they can be paid to write a letter. That is the kind of respect. And he's talking about respect, and he's talking about tourism development. But the champions of tourism, the people who have invested their money in tourism, the people who are using, who you depend on tourism for, you say that they are so low, they can be paid to write a letter. Mr. Speaker, the opposition will support any measure to control COVID in the country. We were the first ones who began to speak about measures taken to protect COVID, Mr. Speaker. But the opposition cannot sit back and allow the government to do whatever they want. The government knew fully well that the state of emergency would have ended on the 4th of September. They knew fully well. That is not news, Mr. Speaker. That's not news. But because of the dictatorial attitude, because they believe that they have a right to do whatever they want to, Mr. Speaker, they have come at this last moment. They've abused their privileges by wanting to change the order, the order paper at the last moment. Again, using the majority abuse of this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, putting you in a position just because they have the power of the majority, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government...
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order. 35-5. Mr. Speaker, I've sat here and repeatedly heard the member for Castries East impute improper motive by suggesting that we have used our majority to abuse... As a dictatorship. As a dictatorship, yes, and to abuse the privileges of the House. I mean, Mr. Speaker, that has been done repeatedly. I waited to see if you would have brought it to the attention of the member. That is out of order, according to Section 35.5.
Honourable Member, you may proceed, but best note had earlier ruled that you need to be careful if imputing improper motives or not.
The truth offends. Mr. Speaker, it is true that this government knew that the state of emergency would have ended on the 30th of September. That's a fact. They knew that. And it's also true that they had ample time to prepare this bill and send for discussion to the public of St. Lucia. So to come here on the 29th of September is an abuse, Mr. Speaker, of the privilege of the majority, Mr. Speaker. And I stand by it. Mr. Speaker, I want to put on the record that the opposition would support any measure to control the spread of COVID, and the opposition would support any individual or groups of individuals involved in the front line in the protection of COVID. We will support them and we applaud the work they are doing. But we are warning that there was an article in The Economist that speaks to the abuse of power by governments because of the COVID crisis. There's an article which I can quote for you, Mr. Speaker, that speaks of the abuse of government. And we believe that this government, Mr. Speaker, in this act speaks about procurement. They speak about procurement, Mr. Speaker. And listen to what they say. Listen to what the bill says about procurement. It says, Mr. Speaker, it says, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable members,
I never went to any bloco without a mask, though. Mr. Speaker, here's what it said. You can do whatever you want, but the fact is the same. It speaks, Mr. Speaker, to procurement. Section 12. In the interest of protecting the public safety and public health, the minister may, after consultation with the minister responsible for finance, after consultation with the Minister of Finance, by order published in the Gazette, waive the application of any rules of law governing the procurement of goods and services. The Minister responsible for Finance shall every quarter lay a report before Parliament on expenditure, every quarter. Why is that necessary when the Finance Act allows the Minister of Finance to give direct awards, as they have been doing all the time? Why is that necessary, Mr. Speaker? Why is it necessary? Why is it necessary? Answer me, why is it necessary? Why is it necessary to have extra procurement powers? Why? Why? So, Mr. Speaker, that is typical of them. Anytime they can't answer, they laugh, they make it a joke, and they get up and they say all sorts of things. But they cannot deny the facts. The facts are they failed to consult the people of St. Lucia. They are disobeying the Bar Association, and they are disobeying the St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association because the minister said, I paid them to write a letter. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank members on the other side that despite an attempt to suggest that this government in any way has abused its authority is categorically not true. I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, that the feeble attempt to suggest that the leader of the opposition genuinely believed, Mr. Speaker, that the country was not ready is grossly untrue, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, for the member to suggest that when he made the comments that we were not ready is not true. In fact, the member from Dennery North, days earlier, was at a session that we had with the command center and also with the NEMO Council. And in fact, I was very pleased, Mr. Speaker. When the member from Dennery North Mr. Speaker, I was very pleased when the member from Dennery North at the time was at the meeting. And I think that he was very much taken by the moment, Mr. Speaker. And like all of us in the room, we're so incredibly impressed with the presentation that was done by the CMO and the command center as to how they were proposing to deal with COVID. And he said it. He said that he is proud to be a St. Lucian today, and that he recognized that St. Lucia would not have to go anywhere internationally. And those were very important words, Mr. Speaker, because 6 months later, the foundation of how St. Lucia was to deal with COVID by a St. Lucian-driven team based on interactions with the Hotels Association, with the Dental and Mental Association. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, the person who is a member of the Dental and Mental Association, Medical Association, is the CMO herself. So in fact, the command center has always co-opted persons. All the command center is a group of entities within government that have the ability to put together regulations and to make recommendations on how to proceed. And that's where all of the SIs and the protocols were coming from. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind everyone in St. Lucia that we take this the business of COVID seriously. It's a serious issue. And Mr. Speaker, I say this sadly, that every step of the way with COVID, whether it was the initial House meetings we had where they walked out, whether it was in COVID meetings that we had where they walked out, where they were invited to be part of the economic recovery strategy in which they walked out, every opportunity the opposition has been given to participate in the management of COVID, they're no-show. And it's only when we receive international accolades and all of a sudden they recognize that the people of St. Lucia, they themselves are appreciative of what has transpired, that they feel the pressure to say they were part of it, but they never have been. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, that seems to be the DNA of the opposition. On one hand, when you poll St. Lucians today, Mr. Speaker, priority number 1, jobs. Priority number 2, jobs. Priority number 3, Mr. Speaker, jobs. And every attempt that this government has made pre-COVID and post-COVID to create jobs, the opposition has fought us tooth and nail. We're not to do the airport. We're not to do the roads. We're not to fix up the hospital. They always have some other idea, Mr. Speaker, as to what the priorities can be, but yet today, in their constitutional duty to be here in the House to provide what those solutions were. We heard the leader of the opposition that again was what? Empty, baseless. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? For a experienced politician that he was, Mr. Speaker, that he relegated his duties in the House to whom? To a bar association and to the Hotels Association. And in fact, when you read the letters of both the Bar Association and the Hotels Association, they too cannot make recommendations as to what specifically they were concerned with. And it is the hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker, because on one hand they are recommending and saying that we have not had consultation, but they themselves as executive members, and I know for a fact, did not have consultation with their members. Because in speaking to lawyers in this country up until this afternoon, and in speaking to hoteliers this afternoon, they did not know that their executive had written those letters. And one has to beg the question, why? Because you have been part of the process. There are many times, Mr. Speaker, that we've been in Cabinet to approve pieces of legislation, and the Attorney General has said no because he needs to get final consultation with the Bar Association. And I don't want any solution to believe that we are taking advantage of our situation. If in fact we were introducing new pieces of legislation, if in fact that this was something that was extraordinary, but no, Mr. Speaker, These are SIs, statutory instruments that have been developed over the last 6 months, that have been worked and introduced on a collaborative basis and have been in effect. All we have done is, instead of applying the state of emergency as the authority, we have given those SIs their own authority in their own act. And the same thing that we're being criticized of, Mr. Speaker, despite there's absolutely no evidence that members on this side or cabinet has in any way abused this authority during this period or taken advantage of the situation, other than being focused on who? The people of this country. And Mr. Speaker, job number one for us was to make sure that nobody died. That was an aspiration. There's no way that any one of us 6 months ago would have felt that we would have escaped somebody dying from COVID. And that we'd be sitting here today and knowing that the advice and the protocols that were collectively put together between the government and institutions in this country and individuals that have worked to the point that nobody has died. That you go around today in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, and persons are enjoying life, I'm scared to say, almost before COVID. And I know, in going around in this country, that I meet so many solutions who, despite their own hardship, and there's hardship, how could there not be hardship, Mr. Speaker? How can there not be? And so what's the solution for the persons who have lost jobs in the hotel sector? It's to reopen the hotels. The Minister of Tourism, who is always so positive, today underplayed what he's achieved, Mr. Speaker. As of November 1st, 80% of the hotels in this country would have reopened. And while it may not mean that every single person who worked at the hotels before has gotten a job, but many of them will. That we've seen an addition of almost 1,500 new jobs in the call centers. And that with the work that we're doing in the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Ministry of Economic Development and in the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Housing and in the Ministry of Sports and in the Ministry of Equity, that we're spending money to build capacity in this country in which construction companies, construction workers, persons with trucks and equipment and material, that they themselves are back in business and are not depending on the largesse of the state, but are earning their own keep. So, Mr. Speaker, it's on 2 counts that we are proud. And the third one, as solutions, I want all of us to bask in the success we've had, and more importantly, the international recognition that we continue to receive as being leaders. And this new piece of legislation is leading. Many countries are going to have to do the same thing. There's no way you can stay in a state of emergency for 2 years. And the reason why the members walked out, because they have nothing to say. They were allowing a bar association and a hotels association, who themselves and their members know that there's nothing to fear, that we have been consulting, we have been inclusive. So, Mr. Speaker, very proud of what we've achieved today. And behind me, Mr. Speaker, is the Chief Environmental Officer, the Chief Medical Officer, and I want to say to them, a special thank you for their leadership and their dedication. And that when I say thank you to them, Mr. Speaker, they know well, because they are genuine leaders, and they know it is their team working behind them. The persons in contact tracing, the persons in environmental health, the persons in the Ministry of Health, the police officers, the firemen, the security persons, the persons in the Ministry of Finance and Customs and Immigration, all the persons around this country, that in the face of the unknown and the threat of life with COVID, were willing to come out and continue to give service to their country and to the citizens. I am proud today to say I am St. Lucian. I am proud. And today is a day that we should be celebrating, and the opposition should be celebrating the success we had. And if you're genuine, how difficult is it to read the Act? These are things that have existed. There's nothing new here. But it's because they know that, Mr. Speaker, that again, they've given up. That they've given up. Mr. Speaker, there's another group of individuals. I mean, I've recognized the Minister of Tourism, and I know that he could not do it alone. His permanent secretary, the staff at the Ministry of Tourism. The Tourism Authority, my own Permandu team, Nancy Charles from my office, Ben Emmanuel, the Cabinet Secretary, and the staff of the Cabinet Secretary. Mr. Speaker, there was no such thing as working between the hours of 8 and 4:30 and Monday to Friday. All of these individuals recognized the urgency and put the country first and never asked about themselves. Well, Mr. Speaker, I talked about my Attorney General, and I talked about his staff. That the amount of hours to rewrite legislation and to bear up to the constant pressures, both from Cabinet and outside of Cabinet. The parliamentary staff, the amount of times we had to come here to seek the extension of an emergency bill, and even yourself, Mr. Speaker. The hours that we stayed here till 2 o'clock in the morning. I think there was one occasion we passed 3 o'clock because bills had to be passed. Speaker, I know the Ministry of Finance would not want me to say anything, but they have been incredible in what we have. Mr. Speaker, in anticipating where we were going and heading and the impact on the economy, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, that when we sit here and we say that we've lost 50% of our tax revenue, $50 million a month of revenue that we would have earned that we don't have. And the Ministry of Finance, calmly, professionally, were able to go out to the World Bank, to the IMF, to the CDB, to the ECCB, and to the Taiwanese to raise close to $600 million in borrowings to substitute for the budget. And I remember the day during the budget when I was able to say to my colleagues that the Ministry of Finance had secured that revenue, and that financing gap that we were seeing, that we're facing, that daunting task, that they had achieved yeoman's work. Unbelievable what they have done. And we just recently, 2 days ago, got approval from the CDB board for our policy-based loan. They're working tirelessly with the World Bank and the IMF on putting together a fiscal policy. Because we don't have the luxury, Mr. Speaker, to live and celebrate what we've achieved, because we know we have tough days ahead of us. We don't know what next year is bringing us. And the ministry staff, not only in effectively doing the job, but I want to say to all of you, it wasn't just about doing the work. It was the collective creativeness in solving problems. And that you should be proud of yourselves. Because what you achieved, the world is now trying to emulate. That's what you've achieved. World-class creativity and hard work and dedication. And for that we say, on behalf of the people of St. Lucia, thank you. So again, Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleagues on the other side, even though they're not here, that I say that in their absence of saying anything, that they have in fact resoundingly endorsed what we're doing, and I appreciate their support in silence anyway. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to regulate the containment of the spread of COVID-19 in the interest of public safety, public order, and public health, and for related matters.
Doesn't matter. We'll just continue to where we left off. The motion. The motion. Back to the motions and then we'll finish it.
It's okay. Honourable members, let us now review the bill. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Non-application.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Part 1, clauses 4 to 19.
Administration.
Part 1, clauses 4 to 19 stands part of the bill. Part 2, clauses 20 to 26.
COVID-19 protocols.
Part 2, clauses 20 to 26 stands part of the bill. Part 3, clauses 27 to 45.
COVID-19 certification.
Part 3, clauses 27 to 45 stands part of the bill. Part 4, clauses 46 to 44.
Travel requirements.
Part 4, clauses 46 to 44 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 5, clauses 45 to 49.
Electronic monitoring.
Part 5, clauses 45 to 49 stands part of the bill. Part 6, clauses 50 to 57.
Collection of health information.
Part 6, clauses 50 to 57 stands part of the bill. Part 7, clauses 58 to 66.
Miscellaneous.
Part 7, clauses 58 to 66 stands part of the bill. Schedule.
Section 2 and 38 free.
Schedule stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, this is the end of the review. The question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I beg to report that the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Act 2020.
Honorable Prime Minister, please take note that the motion to suspend Standing Order 9 only applies to the COVID-19 bill. Very well, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. And where it is provided under Section 41 of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, the act that a guarantee involving a financial liability is not binding on the government unless the Minister of Finance grants the guarantee in accordance with an enactment or with the prior approval of Parliament by a resolution of Parliament. And whereas it is further provided under Section 42 of the Act that any obligation arising from a guarantee given in accordance with Section 41 of a debt is charged, and all debt charges for which the government is liable shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund. And whereas provided under Section 27(3) of the St. Lucia Development Bank Act, 1202, that with the approval of the Parliament, the government may guarantee in such manner and on such conditions as it may think fit the repayment of principal and the repayment of interest and the other charges in respect to any borrowing by the St. Lucia Development Bank. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to guarantee a loan in the amount of euro 5,750,000 or the equivalent in Eastern Caribbean dollars from the European Investment Bank by the St. Lucia Development Bank for on-lending to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. And whereas the commitment fee is 25 basis points per annum charge on the unwithdrawn funds as of 6 months after the signature date. And whereas the loan is repayable over a period of 12 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of 4-year grace period. And whereas the rate of interest as determined by the St. Lucia Development Bank and the European Investment Bank is payable on the outstanding balance of each A, fixed rate tranche at the fixed rate quarterly, semi-annually, or annually in arrear of the payment dates specified in the disbursement notice, commencement on the first payment date following the disbursement date and tranche. B, floating rate tranche at the floating rate quarterly or semi-annually in arrear on the payment dates specified in the disbursement notice, commencing on the first payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. And whereas the loan repayments commence after the grace period of 4 years has expired, be it resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of euro 5,750,000 from the European Investment Bank by the St. Lucia Development Bank for on-lending to micro and small medium-sized enterprises. Be it further resolved, the commitment fee is 25 basis points per annum charged on the unwithdrawn funds as of 6 months after the signature date. The loan is repayable over a period of 12 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. The rate of interest is determined by the St. Lucia Development Bank and the European Investment Bank, is payable on the outstanding balance of each fixed rate tranche at the fixed rate quarterly, semi-annually, or annually in arrear of the relevant pay dates specified in the disbursement notice commencement on the first such payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. And 2, floating rate tranche at the floating rate quarterly or semi-annually in arrear of the payment dates specified in the disbursements notice, commencing on the first payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. D, the loan repayments commenced after the grace period of 4 years has expired. Mr. Speaker, the resolution is seeking approval from the Parliament to guarantee a line of credit equivalent to Euro 5.75 million on behalf of the St. Lucia Development Bank from the European Investment Bank for the financing of projects for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of the COVID pandemic has resulted in economic crisis globally, regionally and locally. The entire tourism sector, as well as most of the sectors, were forced to close down for a number of months. This resulted in thousands of persons becoming unemployed, as well as a number of businesses being forced to shut down permanently. The European Investment Bank is making funds available to the St. Lucia Development Bank to on-lend to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. The purpose of the funding is to assist SMEs in mitigating the short-term financing constraints and provide assistance with working capital and other operational costs. The line of credit will be made available to eligible businesses in the agriculture, agro-processing, construction, and tourism sectors. The proposed line of credit will assist the SLDB in its efforts to implement its mandate as a policy-based institution to support the development policies of the government and, more importantly, to assist micro and small businesses by improving their liquidity and cash flow position during the current economic downturn. The recently launched Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan endorsed the SLDB as a partner in responding to the current economic crisis. Having access to concessional finance for on-lending to the SMEs is a critical factor in our recovery plan. This line of credit supports and complements our resilience and recovery strategies by fostering entrepreneurship, financial inclusion, and systemic resilience of the targeted business sectors. It will also assist in helping to diversify the economy and in the creation of new jobs in both traditional and non-traditional sectors. Mr. Speaker, we're now experiencing unprecedented economic hardship as a nation. The world at large continues to grapple with the fallout from COVID-19 on multiple fronts. This is both a healthcare crisis and a socioeconomic crisis. As a country, we have been able to manage the healthcare response reasonably well, and the same can be said of our management of the economy. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia has navigated through difficult periods in the past, such as the aftermath of 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, the natural disasters such as Hurricane Tomas, and the Christmas Eve trough. However, the COVID-19 pandemic is by far the greatest challenge we've faced as a nation. Although our detractors may argue that this borrowing is unnecessary, it is our responsibility as a government to keep our economy buoyant. This can only be achieved if we continue to provide much needed support to the private sector, particularly small businesses. Small businesses are the backbone and the mainstay of our local economy. While many traditional small businesses have proven to be resilient, the extent of dislocation and loss of productive capacity in the current climate is significant. Consequently, having access to credit at concessional terms will greatly assist with recovery of many small businesses. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Development Bank requires a guarantee to borrow from the international financial institution. The government has in the past guaranteed other lines of credit on behalf of SLDB. As a development bank, it is mandated to provide capital for economic development projects on non-commercial terms. Mr. Speaker, Section 5.1 of the SLDB Act mandates the bank to mobilize and provide finance for and promote and facilitate the expansion and the strengthening of the economic development of St. Lucia. And Section 5.2 provides for making loans and credits for development enterprises in the areas of agriculture, fishing, forestry, manufacturing, industry, tourism, and providing technical assistance to development enterprises, and such other things considering necessary in the pursuit of socioeconomic development of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the discussions with SLDB and EIB commenced in mid-2019, and at that time the COVID-19 was not even on the horizon. The board and the management of SLDB have invested many hours in preparing for this line of credit with the EIB. To qualify for the line of credit, the SLDB had to undergo a rigorous set of tests. The terms and conditions governing the proposed line of credit are as follows. Loan amount will be in the amount of equivalent to euro 5.75 million. Disbursements of the credit made in up to 5 tranches in a minimum amount of the equivalent of euro 1 million for each tranche. The disbursement tranches will be either at the fixed rate or floating rate. Interest is payable at the fixed rate on the outstanding balance of the fixed rate and the fixed rate tranche, and the floating rate on the outstanding balance of the floating rate tranche. The repayment period is 12 years with a grace period of 4 years. Repayment of the principal and interest will be made quarterly from the 4th anniversary date of disbursement of each tranche. Appraisal fee of euro 15,000 payable by SLB on or before the date of contract. A commitment fee of 25% basis points or 0.25% per annum charged on the unwithdrawn funds as of 6 months after the signature date. Security will be in the form of a government guarantee and is required prior to the first disbursement. Mr. Speaker, the above terms are extremely concessional, and the government of St. Lucia will not incur any direct cash outlay given the guarantee is a contingent liability. Like other contingent liabilities, it is not direct lending to the central bank. It will be recorded in the accounts of the government upon disbursement. The funding and balance is updated once the SLB makes repayments. Mr. Speaker, the government will ensure that the interest rate and other lending terms for credit to be provided by the SLB to the SMEs will be highly concessional. We would also like to take this opportunity to register our appreciation to the European Investment Bank for their assistance in providing this line of credit, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. I therefore present this resolution for consideration by this Honorable House.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of €5,750,000 from the European Investment Bank by the St. Lucia Development Bank for on-lending to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Be it further resolved that A, the commitment fee is 25 basis points per annum charged on the unwithdrawn funds as of 6 months after the signature date. B, the loan is repayable over a period of 12 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. C, the rate of interest as determined by the St. Lucia Development Bank and the European Investment Bank is payable on the outstanding balance of each 1. Fixed rate tranche at a fixed rate quarterly, semi-annually, and annually in arrears of the relevant payment dates specified in the disbursement notice, commencing the first such payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. And 2. Floating rate tranche at a floating rate quarterly or semi-annually in arrear on the payment date specified in the disbursement notice, commencing on the first payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. D. The loan repayments commence after the grace period of 4 years has expired. Honourable Member for Swazia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me as Minister of Commerce if I did not rise to support this motion, albeit very briefly. As a government and as a ministry, we continue to seek avenues to support our local SME sector, Mr. Speaker. In fact, very recently we saw the launching of the ECCB Credit Guarantee Scheme, Mr. Speaker, where US $12 million will be made available to qualifying businesses, and they would be actually guaranteed 75% of the debt would be guaranteed, Mr. Speaker. So apart from providing various concessions to small micro businesses, Mr. Speaker, the government continues to look for avenues to provide areas for businesses to be able to access funding, and this loan from the European Union, Mr. Speaker, is no exception in terms of the efforts by government. Mr. Speaker, we heard earlier today that one of the restrictions in terms of small businesses being able to go forward is that commercial banks have sort of tightened up in the area of lending. And so, Mr. Speaker, we welcome the avenue of the St. Lucia Development Bank in being able to release such assistance to these entities. We also note, Mr. Speaker, the very, very generous rates, lending rates that are being applied, which obviously would make it a lot more attractive and a lot more feasible and sustainable for some of these businesses. We hope that the SLDB will also provide very generous other terms to enable the businesses to pick up and make up in these very, very difficult times post-COVID. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this motion 100%, and as a Minister of Commerce and as a government, we continue to look for other areas and other avenues that we can support our small and micro businesses. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Babono.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it has been a very long day for us. As anything else, I think I need to take this opportunity to rise and to give support to this resolution. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you would agree that what we have accomplished here this day is clearly an indication, despite we have been chastised and been blamed for not realizing and giving support to local industries. I'm sure you'd agree that this resolution is clearly an indication of our support to small businesses, especially as it pertains to agriculture. And Mr. Speaker, moi voulais dire that comme gouvernement, nous toujours qu'à faire bagaille qui peut supporter agricole. Because nous tenons plus bon aujourd'hui à mon parlement pour Castries East, du gouvernement changer l'industrie à sortir from agricole pour tourisme. Et puis vous, pas tenu pièce lettrée en agricole. But here it is today, we are coming to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, passing a resolution that will give support to our farmers and also, Mr. Speaker, to our fishers and our agro-processors. And I'm sure all of us here would agree this is opportune because we all know the negative impact as far as COVID on St. Lucians, as far as a lot of St. Lucians have lost their jobs. And when I sit in my office, in my parliamentary office, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of St. Lucians in my constituency that will come to me with good ideas, brilliant ideas, Mr. Speaker, but the challenges that they face with is how they get the resources to be able to implement these ideas and, of course, to be gainfully employed. Si, Mr. Speaker, vous avez changé quoi gouvernement? When we were there, we had this youth in agricultural program where my government was able to get grant funding of $3.2 million from the CARICOM Development Fund to support young farmers in agriculture. And in fact, at that time, you looked targeting 150 young farmers where we would have leased government lands to them. In fact, the Speaker, at the time, we had identified 5 areas in St. Lucia where these lands belong to government, and we are going to list the lands to these individuals and give them the support. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the way we had conceptualized the project, we lost the elections, and when we came back, unfortunately, we realized the project did not bear the type of impact that it was created to have, Mr. Speaker. Of course, if you can speak to the experience of the member for Solar Saltibus, because that's one of the areas where lands were identified. A number of farmers, young farmers, were given lands, but the support system for them was not forthcoming. And we had to look for additional resources through the BIT to support these young farmers. So, Mr. Speaker, here's an opportunity again for these young farmers through this program to get resources that will assist them in being able to continue with the programs that they have identified. Also, Mr. Speaker, you will ask about agro-processing. You have heard a lot about Saguvet Makafe about agro-processing. You about agro-processing. You heard people on the radio talking about government not doing anything about agro-processing. And I'm sure in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, you remember that as a government, we established 2 agro-processing facilities. In fact, when we came back in, we had to open one in Niger. The Solution Labour Party, under the leadership of the member for Beaufort North, after 4 years, Mr. Speaker, did nothing about the one in Niger. We had to open it when we came back in, get the resources to refurbish it and open it. Heritage again, Mr. Speaker, we have a number of persons we know, because we have been involved with them. I have met with them, the ministry have met with them, and what they are telling us is that, look, they want the type of financial resources that will enable them to continue their business. So Heritage again, Mr. Speaker, c'est gens qui ont fait agro-processing, qui ont une opportunité pour joindre l'argent pour continuer le business, Mr. Speaker. So le gouvernement ça, le gouvernement Florboa, Mr. Speaker, c'est un gouvernement qui n'y l'était ouais. L'était ouais. C'est ça que c'est the small people. C'est le gouvernement Florboa, c'est le gouvernement qui n'y l'était ouais. Farmers, qui n'y l'était ouais, pêcheurs. So when you are hearing that we are not for St. Lucians, we are always for foreigners and foreigners and foreigners, Heritage, Mr. Speaker, today we are demonstrating in a tangible way, working with the St. Lucia Development Bank, putting resources there where we can assist those persons who are interested in continuing to be gainfully employed by undertaking initiatives that will enable them to help out the growth of our economy. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I give this resolution my full support. I want to express my appreciation to the Ministry of Finance and all those involved, and I'm hoping that whatever system and policies that will be put in place, Mr. Speaker, would not be difficult and will be very much accommodating for those persons who are interested, Mr. Speaker, in accessing these funds, to be able to get the funds, to be able to implement the business. So I want to support this resolution, Mr. Speaker, and I'm looking forward to the successful implementation of that resolution. Thank you.
Member for Castries Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise briefly to support the resolution before this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, it is a very opportune time, in fact, for the Honorable Prime Minister to present this resolution before this honorable House for the purpose of raising funds to support micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Mr. Speaker, by the grace of the Almighty God,
And only by His grace, we have been able to so successfully combat the challenges provided by COVID-19. And, Mr. Speaker, whereas we have not lost lives, we have certainly lost livelihoods. And I think that that is the most negative impact that we have suffered as a result of COVID-19. We have lost livelihoods. So, Mr. Speaker, even now as we have consolidated our best practices in the form or structure of a COVID-19 bill, it is important for us to turn to the aspect of supporting the rejuvenation, of supporting persons, so many of whom need to build back their lives from a social and economic standpoint because of the continued effects of COVID. And just as the Prime Minister brought in the resolution for the village tourism, which was opportune in its own way, this, Mr. Speaker, is now another effort to ensure that we deal with all of the effects of COVID-19, the impact on health, making sure that we continue to be safe, and of course, the negative impact on the loss of livelihood. So, for my constituency, certainly this is very important because, Mr. Speaker, while we have commended all the first responders who've done such an excellent job, on the ground in our constituencies, our constituency groups and personnel were first responders because we had to be out there, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that even during the lockdown, that persons were provided with the kind of support that they needed. And one of the things we saw was the extent to which there was a loss of employment. And as the hotels and businesses are reopening, Mr. Speaker, they may not be able to absorb everybody. Some people have gone on in the COVID times to dig deep and found creativity, talents, ideas, and have now started with small business plans that they want to see to fruition. And that's such an excellent opportunity, Mr. Speaker. Even while some persons can go back to their traditional work, others are looking for other ways to generate employment, not just for themselves, but for others. Certainly in my constituency with our Synergy program, we have started a new program called Synergy Business Support. We found that we had to do that because you can't give everybody money, you can't give everybody a grocery voucher, you can't give everybody bursary support, and you don't want to do that. If you are able to help someone with an idea, you want to do that so that they can generate income for themselves, for their families, and of course to employ others. So this is such an excellent opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to again consolidate our efforts to revive and to bring back economic activity in our country. So, Mr. Speaker, I am very, very pleased to support this motion brought by the Honourable Prime Minister, as I see the benefits for St. Lucians as a whole and certainly for the constituents that I have the honour of representing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Grizzly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this motion. And I support this motion for a number of reasons, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today has to be registered in history as a very positive day for St. Lucia. I say so Mr. Speaker, as Minister responsible for the social services, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say that as part of an administration that has responded in the way that it did to an unprecedented, unforeseen pandemic that hit the world, including St. Lucia, and the way we were able to respond, Mr. Speaker, I must say, if I can say so myself, it was remarkable. Mr. Speaker, I was very pleased when the Honorable Prime Minister, member for Miku South, gave due recognition and credit to a number of people who gave human service, went beyond the call of duty, and provided the guidance, the expertise, and the leadership to St. Lucia for the people of, for the benefit of the people of St. Lucia. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, it is commendable that we as an administration can recognize that we did not do it all on our own, but I want to give commendation to this administration for not being too arrogant or pompous to take advice, to seek guidance, and to accept expert counsel and leadership from the technocrats of St. Lucia who have proven that they are second to none and can stand head and shoulders with anyone in the rest of the world. Mr. Speaker, this is a government whose initial response was to provide food subsidies, to provide educational assistance, to provide assistance to the poor and vulnerable in the various programs like the PAP program, the program for children living with disabilities, the program for people living with HIV/AIDS, both vertically and horizontally. Mr. Speaker, after having done that, we recognize the immediate need for assistance, and we came to the assistance of those who were most in need. Mr. Speaker, we also looked at the income subsidy that was provided, and of course we worked in conjunction with the NIC who had their program, and there was this other program in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance administered by the Ministry of Equity, where we provide income subsidies and assistance to people who had lost their jobs as well. Mr. Speaker, having done that, we did not just rest on our laurels and figure that that was it. We recognize that, yes, we provided the assistance to people who were in need at a time of need, but we do not want to have a situation where St. Lucians will forever remain dependent on government for any kind of handouts or to provide them assistance. So this is the part I'm most pleased and proud of, Mr. Speaker, that this government has the foresight to take the initiative to put in place programs and initiatives that will set the platform for St. Lucians to do for themselves what they can do best, that is to become self-sufficient and independent, and on the back end of COVID-19, that puts St. Lucia in a position where it is better prepared than even before COVID. And so, Mr. Speaker, how best can you do that but to invest in our people? Mr. Speaker, and not just our people, we looked at those people who are in small enterprises, micro enterprises. We look at locals, Mr. Speaker. Even in the tourist industry, when we look at the motion that was passed earlier with village tourism, we provided opportunities, we provided the facilities for those people to get involved in St. Lucia's main industry, the tourist industry, by investing through capital provided for them with the assistance of the St. Lucia Development Bank, a facility made possible by the government of St. Lucia. And now, Mr. Speaker, we are going further to provide a facility for small and micro enterprises to get the financing required to start businesses, to become self-sufficient, self-employed, and to get industries going in St. Lucia, so that at the end of COVID, or before the end of COVID, we can begin to put ourselves in a position where, as I said before, we can be even a better position than we were pre-COVID. Mr. Speaker, that is what leadership is all about. That is what foresight is all about. And so, Mr. Speaker, there are those who may not want to give credit where credit is due. But, Mr. Speaker, it is no mean feat for a small country like St. Lucia to be considered among the best in the world in its handling of COVID. Mr. Speaker, we got our accolades for the manner in which we handled the health aspect of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, with those measures being taken now, I predict very soon, not long from now, you will hear us getting our accolades for the way we are handling the economic side of coming out of COVID. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say St. Lucia can breathe a sigh of relief thus far with how we have done with the handling of COVID, the best in the region, among the best in the world. Mr. Speaker, that didn't just come by accident. That is a function of leadership. Mr. Speaker, that is predicated on good governance, governance with foresight, governance that is all-embracing, willing to take counsel, and willing to put its people in a position to provide the leadership that we know they can provide. So now, Mr. Speaker, what we are saying to St. Lucia is that we have confidence in our own people because they have demonstrated, like I said, they can stand head and shoulders with the rest of the world or even ahead of the rest of the world as trendsetters. So, Mr. Speaker, when we take those measures that we are embarking on right now, like what we did for village tourism, like what we are doing for small and micro enterprises, Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt in my mind, again, we will be trendsetters. We'll be the ones setting the pace as to what it is good governance means and proper leadership can do in coming out of a crisis and overcoming the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand here to support this motion to say to St. Lucians that you have a government that is looking after your best interests, that is interested in you, and to demonstrate that we are investing in you, St. Lucians. When you have a good thing, Mr. Speaker, you don't spoil it. When something is good, Mr. Speaker, you don't change it. Mr. Speaker, Sibo, Dibo, this government handling of this situation is remarkable, it's exemplary. Mr. Speaker, we cannot take chances with our future. We cannot gamble with our future. At a time like this, we are fortunate, I must say, and we must thank God that at this time, we had the best government in place to be able to deal with the situation in the best possible way. So I say to St. Lucians, continue to work with us. We are working for you. I say to St. Lucians, continue to support us. We are providing support for you. I say to St. Lucians, do not gamble with your future. Do not take chances with your future. Do not go back to failed administrations. Go to those with a proven track record who you know that you can count on and you can trust. Mr. Speaker, today, my heart is in a good place. I have a sense of relief. That is not to say, Mr. Speaker, that I'm suggesting by any measure that we are out of the woods. Mr. Speaker, we have some ways to go. And I ask all our technocrats, our professionals, our experts to continue working with our government. And I ask my colleagues to continue providing the stellar leadership that we have provided thus far. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt in my mind that on the back end of COVID, St. Lucia will not only stand as an exemplary state in the manner in which, in terms of the manner in which we have handled the situation, in which we have dealt with the crisis, but I have no doubt in my mind that we will have a stronger local-based locally based industry when it comes to tourism. I have no doubt in my mind we will have a more industrious population. I have no doubt in my mind that we will be a country that will be on a path to continued, sustained development as long as we continue to sustain this government. And I ask St. Lucians, we have done well so far. So I'm making the appeal, let's continue to do well. Take advantage of the opportunities. Support your government. And if we want to continue to do well, let's continue to keep a government in place that has done well and will continue to do well. Because we have the interests of St. Lucians. Contrary to what you may hear from the opposition and the detractors, we have the best interests of St. Lucia and St. Lucians at heart. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask, before I take my seat, that St. Lucians avail themselves of all the opportunities that are being presented to them right now. This, you know, they say sometimes out of the bad comes good. They say sometimes crises present opportunities. Mr. Speaker, that is what I'm saying before us here today. So I'm asking, starting with my people of Grosile and the rest of St. Lucia, take full advantage of these opportunities that are being presented to you through the foresight, the vision, and leadership of your government, and ensure that as a collective, we as a government, we as a people, we as a nation, put ourselves in a position, as I said, to come out stronger and better than ever. I want to implore my colleagues to continue the hard work that they've been doing. The Honorable Prime Minister has mentioned the stellar work that has been done so far, the many sacrifices, the long meetings. Mr. Speaker, when some people say we've done nothing, I agree with them. To us, that's nothing. Mr. Speaker, you have just seen the tip of the iceberg. As we go forward, as we go ahead, in time to come, there's more to come. In time to come, there's better to come. Mr. Speaker, in time to come, we will come back to continue the work of our people. Because this is what St. Lucia needs today. This is what St. Lucia needs tomorrow and in the future. So where those who cannot deal with the task, they will run away. But we are here. We are here, prepared to put our shoulders to the wheel to deal with the challenge that is before us. Because we are not a government of talk, we are the workers. Mr. Speaker, and the workers are calling on St. Lucia to work with us. I thank you.
Member for Mikwood North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise to lend my support to this motion, and I do so with or through gendered lenses, because perhaps while we are committed to serving the entire citizenry, many of us may not have stopped to think and ponder the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on women in particular. And if I may say further, that the targeted group, the group of potential beneficiaries of this resolution, more than likely will be women, many of whom are single women engaged in small, medium, and micro enterprises. And therefore, I wish to applaud the Minister responsible for Commerce and the Minister for Finance for this facility, because you may recall earlier this month we held an event at the NTN studios in the good company of my colleague from Grosley, Minister responsible for equity, and a member for Castries Southeast, Minister responsible for economic development. And that event was to make or to showcase the success that we had had in raising financial resources to meet the needs of women in particular who were economically displaced by COVID-19. I want to thank them for that, for their partnership. So what we are discussing here today, as we saw earlier in the debate, that we are catering to the needs of people who otherwise would have been caught on the hard shoulder of economic distress, especially within this current pandemic. But what we have demonstrated and continue to demonstrate as a government concerned about the well-being of our people, is that we make available to them opportunities and avenues to allow for them to come out of the economic distress. Mr. Speaker, this facility, I'm sure, when my colleagues at the Gender Relations Unit will peruse what is available, they will feel more empowered and encouraged in engaging with the many women who have knocked at our doors more recently. We will be in a better position to say, please avail yourselves of this facility when we say that we stand ready to support our women and afford them the economic empowerment that they so bitterly need. We mean it through facilities such as this. So, Mr. Speaker, I must stand and support this motion and say to our women entrepreneurs in particular, many of who you can see their creativity through the masks that we've been wearing. We have seen them divert their talent from traditional business areas to multimedia and digital services. It is facilities such as the one that we are discussing here today through this loan that will provide them with the platform to continue to serve their families, to serve the needs of their families. And Mr. Speaker, it is important that we see this within the wider context or potpourri or suite of interventions that this government has made. This is not a standalone. This is in conjunction with what we have done through the back-to-school program, a program that we have invested more millions than we did previously through the SSDF and the Ministry of Education. This intervention must be seen alongside what we are doing with our digital intervention through e-books and the provision of devices. This intervention must be seen alongside what we're doing for the unemployed through the NIC, for example. So this is not a standalone. This really speaks to the heart of what we as a party, what we as a government represent, that we are people, a government of empathy, compassion, and concern, especially for those most recently displaced because of COVID-19. So I really want to applaud my colleagues who I know were instrumental in ensuring that this would come into being. And I want to say to the people of St. Lucia, here are the answers. The answers on this side of the house most evidently. And when you continue to express your faith and support in the United Workers' Party, you are doing so because you know that we can, we have, and we continue to demonstrate that we are the party with solutions, and we are the party best positioned to take you from one position to the next to help you bail out of your economic distress into a much, much enhanced position and condition for yourselves and your families. I thank you.
Member for Castries now.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud tonight to stand in support of this motion, which is targeting small, medium, and micro enterprises in assisting them in navigating the turbulent waters pre-COVID and current COVID. It is a timely intervention, an intervention of a government which cares, an intervention of a government who is in search of resolutions, and a government of vision. But, Mr. Speaker, most significantly is the fact that some of those who will benefit from this intervention, some of those small, medium, and micro enterprises, are most likely enterprises and businesses who were affected pre-COVID. And there are those who have been affected since COVID. But there must be some sensitivity, Mr. Speaker, by the institution rather, that will be called upon as the vehicle to deliver the interventions, to understand that the delivery of the intervention at this time is a most trying time for those very businesses. Because, Mr. Speaker, while we are very confident and the government has done everything conceivable in terms of recovery, in terms of what we are doing in tourism and the promise of a rebound within the tourism industry, while we are also very aware that it will not happen within a very short space of time, we also understand that the period that it will take to return to normalcy, pre-COVID situation, is going to be a very peculiar period that will require guidance and counseling to those very people who we are attempting to help. Because, Mr. Speaker, if indeed some of those encountered difficulty prior to COVID, on the times which we may consider to have been then normal times of buoyancy, normal times of economic activity, normal times of opportunity, and they've found themselves in stressful situations, it means that there must be some sensitivity and some attention paid to how do we hold their hands and lead them out of troubled waters. And I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that while those funds will be made available to the institution most suited to do so, an institution which was reintroduced during the period 2006 and 2010, that institution, in collaboration with other institutions and entities and other systems within the government structure, will attempt to put in place some mechanism that can help some of those persons who have found themselves in difficulty pre-COVID in normal time or in peacetime, and during COVID in times of war. Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely necessary, because it may very well be a recipe for persons getting assistance and believing that they've got the lifeline and that they can now continue along the same way. There is need for financial guidance and counseling in this exercise. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of people who have lost their jobs. There are a number of people who have lost their businesses. There are a number of people who are crying out for assistance. And this intervention, Mr. Speaker, is an opportunity. I'm aware of men and women who for years have invested all of their earnings all of their earnings, all of their talents, all of their energies, all of their treasure, Mr. Speaker, and today they are in difficulty. Mr. Speaker, I know of women, dedicated women to a cause, dedicated women to a profession, dedicated women to helping to make a contribution to the country who today need that kind of support. And so, Mr. Speaker, my standing here today is to say that we have found ourselves in a good place to assist those individuals. We have found ourselves in a good place with the nature and the record of our own performance in navigating through COVID, thanks to those technocrats and all involved under the leadership of the Prime Minister. But we must not fail, Mr. Speaker, as we make those facilities available, as we make the intervention available. We must not fail, Mr. Speaker, in assisting those who have found themselves in difficulty, to help them, give them that helping hand to get out of the quagmire that they found themselves in during the period that I've spoken to. But most of all, Mr. Speaker, there are many young people who today have got ideas, who want to venture into business, who are in search of opportunities, who are in search of the necessary financial support to push them forward. And most recently, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity of speaking to a young man who visited me, who is in search of that kind of support, who is saying, I've got an idea. I've developed an idea that allows for individuals, by a very small investment, into a simple thing called a stamp, a simple thing called a sticker, who can invest for as minimal as at a minimum of $5, and that sticker, Mr. Speaker, grants him or grants the purchaser the opportunity to be able to earn credits and to benefit from discounts at various enterprises throughout the country based on his own pavement pounding by negotiating and getting those companies to subscribe to his stamp system, that persons can benefit through a discount by earning just one stamp for $5, and that person simply has to present it to the store and to receive a discount. That's only one individual, Mr. Speaker. One young man who have sat and have come up with that simple idea, no great technology, just a simple idea of a stamp that you earn and you utilize it at various enterprises, various businesses, and to get discounts. And there are many more who would like to come out. One of the problems, Mr. Speaker, though, that we have in this country, there are many with great ideas, many with great inventions in this country, but most of whom are scared to share it with anybody. They're scared to share it with anybody, Mr. Speaker, because they're afraid that their invention, their idea, their intellectual property is likely to be stolen. And those persons, Mr. Speaker, would like to be assured that through the necessary systems that we already have in this country, where they can register their intellectual property, etc., they are concerned. But most of all, Mr. Speaker, they are concerned that even whether they register it or not, in an attempt to gain financing, Mr. Speaker, that it is likely that simply by introducing it and presenting it to the financial institution, that the idea can be stolen and then utilized by someone else who has the necessary financial capacity to do it. And they who don't have are then now the victims of the ideas being stolen. So, Mr. Speaker, I believe we are moving in the right direction. I believe that there is opportunity and there is appetite for this kind of initiative to get our young people with great ideas who are coming forward to be able to access those avenues, but also at the same time to be able to hold the hands, particularly of our nationals who have already made the investments in this economy, to be able to rise again and to continue to participate and make their contribution in the economy. We have a responsibility as a government, Mr. Speaker. Our responsibility is to save and to cover, to protect our people and to lead them on. We need to be mindful that the landscape in the country belongs to us. And so we cannot allow the landscape to change merely by depending on foreign investment alone. We have to look inwardly and to allow our own people to propagate the land and to make sure that throughout the length and breadth of this country, that this land is punctuated by our locals, our people who are given opportunity to make their contribution and to be successful in an economy within which there are opportunities for all. I thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At this point, I would like to wrap up. And in wrapping up, Mr. Speaker, I just want to put everything we're doing in tonight into context. Because one of the things that may have been overlooked, I think that the member from Grosley pointed to it, is that discussions began as early as 2019. So this was not an accident or as a result of COVID. And I've said it, and I'm going to say it again tonight, Mr. Speaker. I think that one of the proudest moments for us as a cabinet is when we took the time out to review our midterm strategy, post-COVID. The 7 items and 7 areas that we've focusing on. And there's not one area that we found ourselves saying, maybe we'd have to reconsider that. So in fact, even with the absence of COVID, but certainly having to do with climate change, Mr. Speaker, we were on the right track, whether it was the e-government and Minister Joseph, the representative from Castries Southeast, spoke about it. By the end of this year, Mr. Speaker, 54 services will be online. Your ability to get your passport and to get your birth certificate. And we're talking about equity in this country, particularly for those constituents who live in the South, Mr. Speaker, who for years have been discriminated against. Young athletes who, because they were living in the South, could not become a member of a national team. The sports academy that we've started in Gros-Islet is to put an end to that, where all top athletes can go to a single school and train together, stay together, and not only for it to be equitable, but for us to raise the standard of our competition internationally. Mr. Speaker, we talked about building a new St. Lucia. And for the members on this side, I know what we meant. We meant building a world-class St. Lucia. And members on this side have never had the apology for being ambitious, Mr. Speaker. It's not about just trying to survive. It's about becoming the best, about by leading by example. And what we've seen, Mr. Speaker, is a government that has a holistic view. It's not sufficient to say that we're going to help persons simply to get a loan, but it's creating the enabling environment, Mr. Speaker, for them to succeed. Having access to land, being able to get technical support, and to be genuine. We had a discussion in Cabinet this week. Is it sufficient to say and to believe in our hearts that persons should have access to a public beach in this country? It's not sufficient. I don't think there's a solution that if you ask them whether in fact the solution should have access to a public beach, that it would say no. The difference is a government that has now put its money where its mouth is and not only making sure that every single beach is accessible by solutions, but they are facilities to encourage the use of those beaches. And that's the part I don't understand, Mr. Speaker. We talk about politics. Sue Frere-Fonse-Jacques voted the Labour Party for 4 terms. The Hummingbird Beach project was started. They left it there for 5 years. How can I believe, or anybody else believe, that they genuinely care about the people of this country? Small businesses were struggling, but the idea of reducing the VAT rate never dawned upon them. How is that? But the bill that we've passed tonight are just one component, and that's what I want to make. One component of a holistic plan to help people. Changing education, changing the quality of sports fields and the level of competition, that they are training and competing on facilities that when they leave St. Lucia would be of equivalent. And dedicating resources like they have never been dedicated to, in despite of COVID, that we've continued because we believe that development is holistic. It's about kids being able to play sports. It's the success of the aquatic center, and now saying we want pools around the island. It's not about just talking about agriculture, it's about believing in it. And despite all the problems that Bananas has, this government and this Minister of Agriculture has never wavered on our commitment to the farmers. Why? We genuinely believe that cocoa and bananas are the only 2 crops that would allow us to fully use all the land in St. Lucia. Why? Because the demand for those products is much greater than what we can ever produce. Fresh vegetables, as good as they are and as important as they are limited because it's the consumption on island and limited to the consumption to the immediate islands. And they're not crops that take a lot of land. But interspersed now with those other crops, a farmer could make a real income. And then imagine if in fact we're successful in village tourism, the idea of having more hotel rooms near villages and even on some of the larger estates here that diversifies their income. The investment in roads wasn't about economic stimulus. It just happened to be happening at the right time. It was about increasing the access. The member from Gros-Islet took me to Kasamba to see a road. And I remember when you used to leave Trim Stadium facilities to go down to the bottom of that road. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it was 15 to 20 minutes minimum to get there. And now you do it in 3 minutes. But the difference is that persons who may not have been contemplating Airbnb, because they knew that the tourist would not come there, whether that tourist is from Trinidad, from Barbados, from Martinique, or from the diaspora, or our traditional source markets. Now they can think of it. That's what investment does in terms of capacity. The opposition has lost sight of the plot, Mr. Speaker, that the investment in the international airport is not about bragging, it's about a necessity. It's about showing the commitment that the government has to tourism in this country. Who would go to Hunor Airport now and say that that's world class? Which one of us? And which one of us could go there now and to say if that's what it was going to stay as, that this government is committed or the country is committed to tourism? And we've said it. The Minister of Agriculture and I understand it implicitly. It's not about whether it's tourism or agriculture, it's both. There's no hotel displacing farmlands. In fact, the more hotel rooms that we have, the more of a local market we create. The more international exposure we create for our manufactured products, for our young musicians. The orange economy. It's not about just saying it, it's about delivering on it. The changes in the Incentive Act in the Ministry of Commerce to facilitate persons in non-traditional industries to access incentives. I was surprised that the Minister of Tourism forgot to say that when the former government put tax credits in for investment into the country, you had to make a minimum investment of $50 million. How many solutions are going to invest $50 million into investment? So they were discriminated against. In fact, it should have been the other way around. For every dollar that they put in, we should have given them a tax credit of $3. But this government is going to go a step further and invest in an infrastructure, both technical and physical, and making lands available to small businesses in this country, and continuing to improve the efficiency, not the ease of doing business, Mr. Speaker, but the cost of doing business, because it's about the competitiveness on a global basis. And we will continue to fight on an international scene, Mr. Speaker, not to beg, hat in hand, as if somebody owes us something, but on a proposition of value. A proposition in which we will do well, and in us doing well, you're going to do well. So help us because we can help you. Not one of guilt, Mr. Speaker. That's the problem with the former government. Somebody owes you something. I know of no success story in which somebody believes somebody owes them something and they succeed. You must always intend to add value. That is the proposition that we're proposing. We will put more value on the table, and exactly what the member from Castries, from Grosley said. You must motivate yourself to take advantage of these opportunities. That's what they're there for. And we've shown that we can handle COVID from a health perspective. We're not out of the woods, as was being said economically, but we're on the right track. And if we can take advantage and push hard and stop this idea of self-pity. I heard members on the other side talk about workers who've been laid off. The hotels that paid the severance allowed the workers to get money they would not have otherwise gotten. The hotels are not going anywhere. In fact, some of those persons took their severance and decided to have a career change, and have gone into the IT sector, have gone into the infrastructure, have gone back to open up their own small businesses. In fact, applications to the shopping malls for commercial space is on the rise. Revenues are on the rise. You can see it for yourself. You drive around St. Lucia. So I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly thank members on this side for their support, their participation, and their input into making this happen and putting together a holistic plan that will not only deliver a new St. Lucia, it will deliver a world-class St. Lucia, but more importantly, it is a world-class St. Lucia that will create tremendous opportunities for everyone who is willing to apply themselves in this country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorized the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of €5,750,000 from the European Investment Bank by the St. Lucia Development Bank for on-lending to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and bid for the resolve that A, the commitment fee is 25 basis points per annum charged on the unwithdrawn funds as of 6 months after the signature date. B, the loan is repayable over a period of 12 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. C, the rate of interest as determined by the St. Lucia Development Bank and the European Investment Bank is payable on the outstanding balance of each one, the fixed rate tranche at a fixed rate quarterly, semi-annually or annually in arrear of the relevant payment date specified in the disbursement notice commencing on the first such payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. And 2, floating rate tranche at the floating rate quarterly or semi-annually in arrear on the payment date specified in the disbursement notice commencing on the first payment date following the disbursement date of the tranche. D, the loan repayments commence after the grace period of 4 years has expired. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 39(1) of Finance Administration Act 1501 that the Minister of Finance may by resolution of Parliament borrow money from a bank or other financial institution for the capital expenditure of government, and whereas it is further provided by Section 42(1) of the Act that there shall be charged on paid out of the Consolidated Fund debt charges for which the government is liable, and whereas the Parliament by Finance Administration Act resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure health system strengthening project statutory instrument number 98 of 2018 authorized the Minister of Finance to borrow the sum of $20 million by way of credit from the International Development Association for the capital expenditure of the health system strengthening project. The maximum commitment charge rate of payable of unwithdrawn financing balance of 0.5% per annum, a service charge payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, 0.75% per annum. The principal amount of the credit payable on each first day of June and the first day of December, commencing on the first day of December 2028 to including the first day of June 2038 at a rate of 1%, continuing on the first day of December 2038 to including the first day of June 2058 at the rate of 2%. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an additional sum of $5 million by way of credit from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the health system strengthening project. And whereas the maximum commitment rate of 0.5% per annum is payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance. And whereas the service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of A, the sum of 0.75% per annum, plus the basis adjustment for the service charge, B, 0.75% per annum. And whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. And whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of June and first day of December for each year of the rate, 1% commencing on the first day of December 2032 and including the first day of June 2040. 2% commencing on the first day of December 2042 and including the first day of June 2060. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an additional sum of $5 million by way of credit from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the health system strengthening project. Be it further resolved that the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, 3/4 of 1% per annum. The loan is repayable in 40 years and from the date of this first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of June and first day of December each year at a rate of 1% commencing on the first day of December 2030, to and including the first day of June 2040, 2% commencing on the first day of December 2040 and including the first day of June 2060. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is seeking approval from the Parliament to borrow an additional sum of US $5 million from the International Development Association, IDA, for the St. Lucia Health System Strengthening Project in light of the COVID pandemic. Mr. Speaker, on the 12th of November 2018, an IDA credit for the Health System Strengthening Project in the sum of US $20 million was approved and became effective on the 15th of January 2019. The project comprises 4 components: design and implementation of an essential package of health services, strengthen the service delivery of support of the essential package of health services, institutional capacity building, project management and coordination, and contingent emergency response, CERC. The contingency emergency response component, CERC, was activated by the World Bank in April 2020 after COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization, WHO. With that declaration, the Ministry of Health and Wellness prepared the CERC action plan, which allowed the use of funds from the Health System Strengthening Project to be used by the government to assist with the COVID-19 response. How does the CERC operate? The CERC component allows the World Bank, in consultation with the country, to redeploy resources in existing World Bank financed projects through restructuring and use of projects' emergency components, as well as contingent financing instruments designed for catastrophes, including pandemics. In the case of St. Lucia, US $10.5 million was made available, $5.5 million from the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction, DVRP, and $5 million for the Health System Strengthening Project. Through the CERC, the Ministry of Health and Wellness sought to provide a response by 1. Building awareness among the population to curb the spread of COVID-19, building testing capacity, strengthening the isolation capacity, and strengthening the capacity to treat COVID-19 so as to minimize the transmissibility, morbidity, and mortality. Mr. Speaker, since the start of the spread of the virus in China, the nation led by Ministry of Health and Wellness took steps to prepare for and respond to the likelihood of the virus being introduced in our country. These initial steps were especially necessary given the high level of fear and anxiety among our population and the novelty of COVID-19. Once the source of financing was confirmed, all efforts to strengthen St. Lucia's ability to address the health and economic impacts of the pandemic began in earnest, and once the first disbursements of the funds were received, the Ministry of Health and Wellness purchased much needed medical equipment and supplies for the isolation and quarantine facilities. This included laboratory testing equipment and materials, other consumables like personal protective equipment, health communication materials and equipment, pharmaceuticals and supplies for the testing and treating of patients and other persons who may have contracted the coronavirus. It has also supported the rehabilitation of Victoria Hospital and the infrastructure works to convert it into a respiratory hospital. Another significant aspect of the response was the public awareness and education campaign, which is ongoing, to keep all informed and address the concerns of persons by providing relevant, factual, and updated information on COVID. Mr. Speaker, the approval of the additional financing of US $5 million that is being requested today will be used to bridge the financing gap created by the activation of the contingent emergency response component. The funding is required to ensure that the objectives of the original health system strengthening project can be achieved. Mr. Speaker, we should not discount the heavy burden that the health and socioeconomic impacts of COVID is placing on the country. The financing for the healthcare system has helped to increase testing capabilities, build isolation units, and enhance public information campaigns to assist with the awareness and prevention, which all forms part of our comprehensive COVID-19 response. Mr. Speaker, you would recall previous discussions in this Honorable House on the COVID-19 response from as early as January, February of this year, when the National Health Security Committee was activated to develop the National Response Plan. We undertook an assessment of the capacities at the ports, health facilities, and other relevant facilities to determine the capacity to respond and identify resource gaps. All the attendant measures of the healthcare response, the imposition of travel restrictions, and the adherence to the protocols operating the 5 respiratory clinics, the Viewfort Wellness Center, the Dennery Hospital, the Grosley Polyclinic, the Leclerc Wellness Center, and the Sufer Hospital, have increased the cost of delivering health care service to the nation. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the hotline number 311, where citizens were able to get information on COVID, remains operational to date. The impact of COVID-19 has reinforced the need for having stronger, more robust, and well-equipped healthcare system in St. Lucia. The work that is being done and the many achievements to date under this project are consistent with our government's health policy objectives. It is therefore vital that in order to achieve the overall vision for a stronger healthcare system in St. Lucia, we must continue with the original plans of the project. This, Mr. Speaker, will ensure that there are adequate resources available to support the health service in an effective and timely manner. The additional financing will also ensure the plans for the improvements to the primary health care service and enhancements to the health information systems in the original project remain intact, with additional measures introduced to respond to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, the original design of the parent project continues to be applicable to the main of improving the accessibility, efficiency, flexibility, and responsiveness of St. Lucia's national healthcare system. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we need to replenish the financing gap created to ensure continued investment in our primary healthcare system and ensure that access to health services is preserved. The activities financed through the emergency response component will strengthen the capacity for surveillance of St. Lucia's health system, laboratory testing capacity, case triage, and the treatment and disease control capacity to mitigate future infectious disease outbreaks. Better disease surveillance will assist in preventing major outbreaks and reduce the economic cost of social distancing measures and the shutdown of economic activity. Having a rapid and effective emergency response can reduce mortality, morbidity, and costs associated with disease outbreaks. By focusing on testing, isolating, and managing COVID cases, the project aims to control the outbreak and limit these occurrences. Mr. Speaker, the project scope is nationwide and the population at large will benefit from this investment. The total project cost will now be $25 million US, which will allow for a more expansive program without increasing the project implementation cost. Mr. Speaker, the financial management arrangements under the additional financing component are expected to be the same as those under the original project. The terms of this loan are the same as the funding obtained under the parent project, with a concessional interest rate of 0.75% of the withdrawn balance, a repayment period of 40 years, and a grace period of 10 years. The government of St. Lucia remains appreciative of the assistance which we continue to receive from our development partners, including the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the Central Bank. We're also very grateful to the support received from the Republic of China Taiwan, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the St. Lucia Bankers Association, the credit unions, and the many other institutions which have participated in the recovery effort of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, our government is thankful that the international financial institutions continue to show a high level of confidence in our stewardship of the economy and the management of COVID-19. The reality remains that St. Lucia is still able to borrow from financial institutions, the regional securities market, and other development partners at concessional interest rates and favorable terms. This is an endorsement of the confidence which is placed in our government and the people of St. Lucia, because our lenders know their funds will be well spent and will be repaid when it becomes due. Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that our borrowing over the recent months has increased, but this is directly attributable to the global economic slowdown in the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic. The increased borrowing has become necessary to fill the financing gap due to increased expenditures and falling revenues. But we are confident that our economy will rebound and we will continue to meet all of our obligations without fail. Mr. Speaker, this additional financing from the World Bank is a testament to the faith placed in our country's ability to withstand the economic shocks resulting from the crisis. Our government has managed the crisis in a fiscally responsible manner, and this has augured well for us. We will rebuild and restore our country with the help of friendly governments and development partners. Mr. Speaker, I therefore present this resolution before this Honorable House for its approval. Mr. Speaker, despite COVID and the increased costs associated to COVID, our government has had no choice but to continue on the significant plans that we had for healthcare. I want to remind all of us that in the midst of COVID, the doctors and the nurses employed by the government and the doctors in the private sector, TAPIOC, and in general practices collaboratively work together to move and open up OKEU. In the midst of the pandemic, the assistance that we were going to get from Martinique and the assistance that we were also in the technical support that we were going to get from Cayman House City were not possible because people could not come in, Mr. Speaker. So it's a huge feat. Is OKU operating the way we want it to? No, Mr. Speaker, because the inputs that were necessary never happened. And we're now still having, despite having the additional cost of COVID, to find the resources to continue to build capacity at OKU, to fix up the equipment, the air conditioning systems, the filters, the electrical systems, adding new MRI machine, as well as putting in new organizational structures, Mr. Speaker. We're in the process of finishing St. Jude's. And Mr. Speaker, again, being an MP from the South, every time that I go to the stadium, it gives me even greater energy to make sure that we can complete the construction of St. Jude's. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly vexing to know how much time was lost and how much money was wasted in what was being done at St. Jude's. And that's not cheap politics, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact. And so this government has had to work doubly hard to resolve the issues that we've inherited, not to make excuses, because we know we must solve these problems for solutions. And I think moving into OKU is a substantial upgrade, but nobody can say that we're providing world-class services, and it's certainly our intention to make sure that we can. The continual upgrading of our community centers, I know the member from Miku North is very excited about her new facility. I know that the member from Ansari Canaries is also excited about his new facility. I know the member from Soufriere is also waiting for his new hospital, and I know that we're breaking ground very soon on the new facility in Dengri. Sorry? Yes, again, because we started, and unfortunately the designs that we inherited were faulty. And so again, I appreciate the patience of the persons from Dengri and the Valley. But I know that they will be very appreciative when they see the completed building. And we'll try to get that as quickly as possible. But it's easy to build the buildings, Mr. Speaker. It's the cost to continue to operate them at a high enough level. That is going to be the challenge. That has remained the challenge. And that's why the healthcare insurance program, Mr. Speaker, that we're going to be introducing is critical to underlying the foundation of everything that we're going to be doing here. And we have not lost any moment. I know the Director of Finance is there. And despite the many challenges the Ministry of Finance has, we're working with the Ministry of Health to make sure that we can complete that project, to try to introduce a new healthcare insurance program as quickly as we can. I know that we were supposed to do it in the fourth quarter of this year. Not 100% sure that we're going to be able to achieve that, but I know that we are working diligently to try to do it as quickly as possible, because certainly in going into next year's budget, we have to find a better mechanism to fund our healthcare services. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I seek to get the support of my parliamentary colleagues on the approval of this bill. Thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow an additional sum of US $5 million by way of credit from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the health system strengthening project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 1/2% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge. 2, 3/4% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan inclusive of a 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of June and first day of December of each year at a rate of 1% commencing on the first day of December 2032 and including the first day of June 2040. 2% commencing on the first day of December 2042 and including the first day of June 2060. Honourable Member for Castries Office.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to lend my support to this motion by the Prime Minister for the additional $5 million. That is to make up for what was used in the CIRC towards the health strengthening project. Mr. Speaker, as you heard from the PM in his explanatory note, we've been accused several times of not using resources that could have been used to assist in critical areas. And Mr. Speaker, the health sector is one of the most critical sectors for us given the impact of COVID and what it has caused for us as a country. To be able to operate all of these facilities, facilities with a different focus dedicated as centers to respond to COVID. To be able to be in this situation, we had to use some of the DVRP funds, which we are grateful that the World Bank facilitated in reapplying some of these funds and some that was also earmarked for the health strengthening project. But what were these funds primarily being used for example, from the DVRP? After we moved VH Hospital into the OKEU, we needed a facility that was dedicated to dealing with COVID-19 cases. When we analyzed the situation, Mr. Speaker, it was clear that the health system, you would not be able to separate because you had limited beds at OKEU. And so the initiative to get VH Hospital as the respiratory hospital to deal specifically with COVID is a clear indication again, Mr. Speaker, of the visionary leadership of this government in responding very quickly to a crisis we had not envisaged that would have happened. Now, Mr. Speaker, I look at the chairs opposite, and they are empty. But there's a reason why these chairs are empty, you know, Mr. Speaker. When people present themselves as being concerned about the people of St. Lucia, if they were genuinely concerned, Mr. Speaker, you know what would have happened? They would have been here discussing the business of the people. Because, Mr. Speaker, where we are, we have been calling for all hands on deck to work together to bring St. Lucia out of the crisis situation that it has found itself, not through any government, but through a worldwide pandemic. But what has happened, Mr. Speaker? Every time the opposition cannot get their way, they walk out. And maybe what they are most famous for in this honorable house is the number, maybe the number of times they have walked out accumulates to more than what they have accomplished in government throughout their term. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, those who really care about the people, it does not matter what time of the day or the night it is, we are going to be here to do the business of the people. You know, Mr. Speaker, for members opposite to walk out on a bill when we have all the technocrats who have dedicated time and hours and effort, sacrificing their time with their family and others. And you know, Mr. Speaker, health is critical. The expenditure we are doing in health is critical. But without the personnel, the money by itself cannot solve the problem. Mr. Speaker, I was a bit taken aback that because the ruling, that in the first place there was an opposition to the bill being brought in at an earlier stage. In other words, we made it that the health protocols, the COVID protocols, we placed ahead of a money bill. And you would think that the members opposite would have applauded that initiative by the government to say that, look here, all they accuse us of is borrowing, borrowing, borrowing. Mr. Speaker, the last time we passed an important piece of legislation, they said we were in the House 2, 3 o'clock in the morning trying to pass a piece of legislation. And what has happened? I was baffled, Mr. Speaker. We brought it earlier so that they could have the opportunity to make their input, so they would not say they were half asleep when the bill was passed, and they tried to oppose that, Mr. Speaker. What can you do to please that opposition, Mr. Speaker? And so, we value the health and well-being of the people of St. Lucia above everything else. And so that is why the agenda, through you, you allowed it, Mr. Speaker, that the House could have changed the order to allow this special piece of legislation, which will continue to contribute to the well-being of St. Lucians in dealing with COVID. And added to that now, Mr. Speaker, we come to the funding part of continuing to be able to address the issues pertaining to the health sector. How are we going to strengthen every sector to give us the end result that we are looking for? And so, Mr. Speaker, that is why I am proud to be a part of this government. Mr. Speaker, throughout the years that I have served in this parliament, I have taken the business of the people very serious. And as far as I'm concerned, the business of the people, Mr. Speaker, ought to be more important than my personal feelings about how business is conducted in the House. So, Mr. Speaker, the ability to allocate available funding has been done on several occasions by this government. I applaud the Minister of Agriculture when the matter for the $20 million for the agricultural farm roads came to cabinet for discussion. and the minister was informed that we were contemplating that instead of doing the agricultural farm roads at that point in time, that funding would be used to help the unemployed, those who were affected. He gladly acceded, and we were able to use these funds. Under the DVRP, we were able to reallocate funds to respond to the crisis. Even the World Bank, through some of the funding that they have made available, they agreed that some of these funds could be reallocated. And the CERC was triggered. Why was the CERC triggered? So that we could respond to the pandemic in a manner. So the International Development Association, the IDA, which gave the initial $20 million, Mr. Speaker, and allowed $5 million to be used in the COVID response situation, have now agreed to replace that $5 million or to increase the loan amount by $5 million. Now the members opposite will come and talk about borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. But Mr. Speaker, all the borrowings that we have done in this honorable house is to bring relief to the people of St. Lucia. The same people who are telling us, reallocate the funds from Taiwan. Don't do the airport. Don't do this. Don't do that. These are creating jobs to keep people employed while we are doing the necessaries by making funding available to address these matters. And so, Mr. Speaker, I applaud the Minister of Finance and the team from the Ministry of Finance and my cabinet colleagues for the sterling leadership that we have seen throughout this period. Mr. Speaker, it's unprecedented. There was no manual that we could go to guide us as to what to do. Everybody, the whole world, was in the same boat at the same time. Nobody had a pattern to follow to deal with COVID, the impact of health and the impact of the economy. But Mr. Speaker, we have risen to the occasion and we have handled the health sector. And it is motions like this in the House that will put St. Lucia on the right path of every piece of borrowing that we have done today is to help restore the economy to a state where our people would not become beggars, but would find themselves in a situation where they can survive the worst of the COVID situation. And so that is why I applaud this initiative and lend my full support to this motion. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament authorized the Minister of Finance to borrow an additional sum of US $5 million by way of credit from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the health system strengthening project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge. 2, 0.75% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of the 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of June and first day of December of each year at a rate of 1% commencing on the first day of December 2030, 2, and including the first day of June 2040. 2% commencing on the first day of December 2040, 2, and including the first day of June 2060. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bills, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Credit Reporting.
Credit reporting.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present the bill for a second reading at the next or subsequent meeting of the House.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment.
Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 48-2 be suspended to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment. The purpose of the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment Bill is to amend the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Act. The Act provides for the administration of the Registry of Companies and Intellectual Property. The registry and currently specifies the hours of business for the registry. However, it was recognized by the registrar of the registry that the hours of business of the registry, including the collection of revenue, may be subject to alteration with varying administrations. As a consequence, every time there is a change to the hours of business of the registry, the legislation would have to be amended to reflect such change. Accordingly, the bill seeks to amend the Act to delete the provisions which specify the hours of business of the registry, which would alternatively be included in a circular that is issued by the Ministry of Finance with the opening times for revenue collection. This would provide for a faster and more flexible alteration process, which is ultimately critical to making the operations of the registry more efficient and improving the ease of doing business.
Honorable members, the question is that the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Act, Cap 13.02.
Honorable members, let us now review the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment Bill. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 4.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Repeal of Section 5.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Repeal of Schedule 2.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, this completes our review. The question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Prime Minister.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment Act 2020.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, before I ask for the suspension of the adjournment of the House, again, I would like to thank both yourself and the staff of the Parliament and the police officers who are here with us, and also not to be forgotten our staff from NTN. I did. Again, sometimes, it's very remiss on our part to forget the little things that make Parliament work. And I certainly want, not only on behalf of ourselves, but also on behalf of the people of St. Lucia, to say thank you to all of you for your continued support and hard work during this period. On that point, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be stand adjourned, sine die.
Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand adjourned, sine die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many of the contrary opinion, say no. Calling for division. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Well, you've just had it, the adjournment of today's sitting of the House of Parliament, sine die, at about 11:25 p.m. and quite an eventful evening it was, due to the fact that we had to start today. We have the number of statements being made by ministers, and we also got as far as having the first motion being presented until the break in the evening, when there was a substantial change in the proceedings, when Honorable Prime Minister looked to get Standing Order number 9 to be suspended to allow the House to move away from the actual sequence of the order paper today to go into the COVID-19 prevention and control bill. That actually brought us a break of about 2 hours, and on resumption, the Speaker did rule that leave would have been granted, and also leave was granted for that bill to go into all its remaining stages at the sitting. Well, we had the bill being presented by the Honorable Prime Minister, the member for Mico South, and then we had a reply from the leader of the opposition, Honorable Philip J. Pierre. Prime Minister Alan Chastney, in his rebuttal to the presentation by leader of the opposition, then had the exit from the chamber of the members from the opposition side, and following that bill, the order paper continued with the third motion that was presented today, and that Parliament authorized the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of €5,750,000 from the European Investment Bank by the St. Lucia Development Bank for on-lending to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. And then we had the second motion being presented, that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow an additional sum of $5 million by way of credit from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the health system strengthening project. And then we also returned to the two other bills that were on the order paper, that of credit reporting and Companies and Intellectual Property Registry Amendment that we found the 48-2 suspension on the standing order for the bills to go through to the remaining stages, and then upon we came to the closing of the session for today, and as I told you, at about 11:25 p.m. So that's it from us here in the Parliament chamber as we come to the end of today's sitting of the St. Lucia House of Assembly, the lower house meeting today, Tuesday, September 29th, 2020. I'm Ryan O'Brien on behalf of the entire crew here at Parliament Building saying good night.